had received his own farm in place of a pension after serving as a private in the British Army during the Napoleonic Wars, including at the Battle of Waterloo. And so the Langman brothers had deep roots in Oro-Medonte by the time the First World War began, and if they had any knowledge of war, it was from stories passed down from their grandfathers. Arthur Langman enlisted in the Canadian Expeditionary Force as a private on March 13, 1916. He was assigned to the 157th Battalion and then transferred to the 177th Battalion on April 1st. His description on enlistment paperwork says that he was 5 feet 9 inches tall, had a dark complexion, gray eyes, dark hair, and a scar on his right hand. His medical history sheet states that he weighed 165 pounds. He embarked on the HMS Metagamma on May 1st, 1917, and disembarked in Liverpool on May 14th. For the next 4 months, Arthur was with the 3rd Reserve Battalion, until on September 13th, 1917, he was transferred to the 19th Battalion in France and arrived at the 2nd Canadian Infantry Brigade Depot the next day. From there, he was sent to the Canadian Corps Reinforcement Camp and spent the last days of September, all of October, and the first week of November there. On November 6, 1917, he departed for his unit in the field and arrived on the 25th. The 19th Battalion was part of the 2nd Division of the Canadian Expeditionary Force and had just participated in the Battle of Passchendaele, which had ended on November 10th. After this, they were given a short break to vote in the 1917 election, and then they returned to the front line in the area of Laon, France, on November 20th, 5 days before Arthur arrived. The 1st Division was stationed at Laon, while the 2nd Division was stationed at the village of Méricourt, which is southeast of Laon and 7 kilometers northeast of Vimy Ridge. Each division had 4 of its 12 battalions forward at any given time. Facing the 1st Division was the German 1st Guard Reserve Division, and facing the 2nd was the German 17th Division. The Canadian divisions rotated out regularly, as both sides settled in for a strategy of active defense for the winter, in which the Germans conducted small raids almost every night. On November 30th, 1917, Arthur Langman was reported missing believed prisoner of war of the German army at Méricourt. He had served in the field for just 5 days. On January 14, 1918, Arthur's record places him in the prisoner of war camp in Limburg, Germany, for 2 weeks before being moved to Dublin. On April 11th, he was moved again to Munster, where he remained for the rest of the war. During this time, he was made to work in a coal mine. According to the memories of his family, many of whom are here today, Arthur was never once punished during his year in the camps. He kept his head down and followed instructions. When he was released, he only weighed 98 pounds, but was able to recover quickly because when his weight when he was discharged was back up to 160 pounds. On November 11th, 1918, the armistice with Germany was signed, ending the fighting. The 10th article of this agreement states that all Allied and American prisoners of war will be released immediately. On November 28, 1918, Arthur wrote this postcard from Ostend, Holland, to his brother Harry. Dear Bro, arrived here this evening, maybe here 2 or 3 days before going on to England. If you're still in England, I hope to see you before many days go by. Your bro, Arthur L. On December 4th, 1918, he arrived at Camp Ripon, England, and came back to Canada on the HMT Olympic, the sister ship of the Titanic, and was in Toronto by January 11th, 1919, and was discharged upon demobilization on February 11th. Arthur would never tolerate a bad word about the German soldiers. The way he saw it was that they were only following orders and weren't his personal enemies, and he didn't fault them for fighting. When his unit had been captured, there had been an explosion which had buried several Canadian soldiers, and he had seen the Germans working hard to save them. He married Nellie McKee on June 11th, 1919, and had a son and a daughter. Meanwhile, Arthur's brother had a very different wartime experience. Harry Langman was drafted under the Military Service Act of 1917. He reported to Orillia for his medical examination on November 3rd. According to his paperwork, he was 21 years, 8 months old, 5 feet, 8 inches tall, and had blue eyes and dark hair. At 142 pounds, he weighed noticeably less than his older brother. He applied for an exemption to military service on the grounds that he was a farmer and received this notice of hearing of application for exemption, which states that a local exemption tribunal would meet at the council chambers in Orillia on November 26 to consider his application. The notice states that his attendance at the tribunal is allowed but not recommended. Whether he went to Orillia or stayed in Oro, it is easy to picture him pacing and anxiously awaiting a reply. On the appointed day, the tribunal met and then gave or mailed Harry this notice of disposition of claim for exemption, which reads, "You are notified that the claim for exemption from military service made on behalf of yourself has been considered by local tribunal number 312 under the Military Service Act 1917, and that the decision of the tribunal was that the exemption be allowed until he ceases to be engaged as a farmer. He kept both notices for the rest of his life, and they are now in my possession." It must have come as a great disappointment to him when, on April 20th, 1918, the government made the following declaration. "Whereas there is an immediate and urgent need of reinforcements for the Canadian Expeditionary Force, and the necessity for these reinforcements admits no delay, and whereas it is deemed essential that notwithstanding exemptions heretofore granted, a substantial number of men should be withdrawn forthwith from civil life for the purpose of serving in a military capacity." The German spring offensive had succeeded in breaking through the French and British lines, and this resulted in the cancellation of almost 42,000 of the almost 73,000 exemptions previously granted to farmers aged 20 to 22. It was a very controversial decision at the time, as the farmers felt that it was unfair to have been pushed to produce as much food and seed, as much land as possible for the war effort for 3 years, and then suddenly lose much of their workforce. But the government felt that its first responsibility was to send soldiers, and so the decision stood. Harry reported for duty at Hamilton on May 7, 1918, and was assigned to the 58th Battalion of the 3rd Division of the Canadian Expeditionary Force, the same unit as 2 other residents. Shown here is Frank Sweet, Harry Langman, and Wilf Johnstone. On July 12, 1918, Harry was sent to the 1st Depot Battalion in Niagara-on-the-Lake. From there, he went to Montreal and took a ship to Halifax. Then, on July 18th, he embarked on the SS Carnarvonshire for England. He arrived in Liverpool on August 15th and went to the 8th Reserve Battalion in Whitley, arriving the next day. On September 19th, a postcard was sent to him. It reads, "Dear Harry, I am just writing you a few lines to let you know we are all well and hope you are the same. Ava is improving nicely these last few days, and Nell is up there still. The Oro Fair is tomorrow, September 20th. I guess there will be quite a crowd there. We'll write later, from LC. Write soon." Ava and Nell were the older sisters of Harry and Arthur. Here's a picture of Nell with her brother Arthur. Nell was a nurse who had served as a nursing sister in the Ontario Military Hospital, as well as the 15th General Hospital in Orpington, England, from January 1916 to August 1918. In her memoirs, her niece Margaret Langman remembered that Nell always cared for sick family members, and on this occasion she cared for her sister, who would later pass away at the end of January 1919. It was there in Whitley that news reached Harry that on November 11th, the armistice had been signed and the war was over. Despite this, Canada's role in the war was not quite finished. On November 16th, Harry was sent to the Canadian Corps Reinforcement Camp in France, and from there to the 58th Battalion in Germany, arriving on December 24th. The night of Christmas Eve, 1918, was a snowy one, and the Canadians celebrated a white Christmas, which no doubt reminded them of home. The battalion cooks put together what they could in order for everyone to enjoy a Christmas meal. At some point around then, Harry received this postcard, which says, "Wishing you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, with love from Lucy C." After this, the 3rd Division was sent to the area of Tournai-Lille, France, for garrison duty for the next month. The troops were kept busy with training and sports in order to stay fit. The 3rd Division was the first Canadian division to be recalled to England and began to arrive at Le Havre, France, for departure on February 2nd, 1919. Harry was granted 8 days leave in England starting on February 6th. On March 12th, he embarked on the RMS Baltic in Liverpool, and on March 31st, 1919, he was discharged in Toronto. Harry married Lucy Crawford, who is the author of the Postcards from Home, on June 2nd, 1923, and they had 2 sons and 2 daughters. This picture shows Harry, Lucy, and their oldest 2 children, Margaret and Mary, with their first car. Here is Harry's helmet from his time in the army. According to Margaret Langman, she and her brothers decided one day to see if this helmet worked, and decided that the only way to do that was to take turns wearing it while the others hit the wearer on the head with an axe, making that the only combat that this helmet has seen. All three children and the helmet survived without serious damage. In 1926, Harry and Arthur, who had co-owned the Bass Lake Farm since 1920, when their parents had moved to Orillia, decided that the farm wasn't enough for both of their growing families. So Harry purchased a farm on Line 12 North in the area of Oro called Rugby, just north of the farm which his brother Herb had bought from their father, which had once been the Ormsby farm. During the Second World War, no male Langmans were the right age for service. During that war, Harry would listen to updates on the radio and write them down in this notebook, starting in January of 1940. The entries at the end of the war in Europe read, May 7th, Germany has capitulated. Tomorrow is declared a holiday. May 8th, victory celebrations were held today in Orillia. Many soldiers, cadets, and school children marched in a parade. After a service at the fairgrounds, they marched through town to the park where they burned the effigy of Hitler. In 1965, Harry traveled to Burlington to visit family, and while he was there, he met up with Joseph Dorchent, who's this gentleman on the right, who was a friend he had made during the war in Belgium. Here's a picture of the two of them in their younger days, and the picture they took during that visit in 1965. Harry would later die on October 3rd, 1968, at the age of 72, and Arthur would die on March 9th, 1981, at the age of 90. The 3 Langman farms are owned by grandsons of Herb, Arthur, and Harry to this day. The wartime experiences of Harry and Arthur Langman were as different from each other as they were from the experiences of most soldiers. Neither was wounded in combat, and neither were among the 28 residents of Oro who gave their lives during that war. Arthur only spent 5 days on the front line, and Harry didn't even reach that level of experience, and so both were exempted from the common ailments of trench foot and shell shock. One spent over 11 months in the custody of the German army, while the other had garrison duty in France. One had volunteered to be a soldier, while the other was conscripted, applied for and received an exemption, and then was conscripted anyway. And yet they were part of a terrible war which shook the foundations of their world, the world they knew, and brought empires crashing down. Despite their limited roles in the actual fighting, they both contributed to Canada's legacy, because whether it was at their country's request or order, they answered, and in that way, they're part of Canada's legacy of the First World War. This brings an end to my presentation. Thank you for listening. Much of the information that I found about Harry and Arthur came from digital copies of their service records, which can be found online. All of the service records have been released as public information. So if you know of anyone in your family who served during World War I highly recommend checking that out to try and find their records. If any of you have questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask them, and I'll try my best to answer them. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Braeden. Is there anybody that has any questions for Braeden right now? Well, Braeden, I'm just going to comment that I kind of think I see a family resemblance between you and those photos. I don't know if anybody said that, but I noticed that instantly. I thought that.
I'll take that as a compliment.
I'll see if I can. Maybe I'll just, if there's anybody interested, you can just unmute yourself and you can try, or if you'd like, you could kind of like wave at the screen. And as you see, Hazel said, very good presentation, Braeden. So that's good. But yeah, if there's anybody that wants to like ask any questions, can feel free to. I think we have maybe Judith. Judith, did you want to ask something?
Thank you, Braeden. It was great to hear.
Judith,
I just wanted to say that it was wonderful to hear about the family, because we spent many summers at the farm with Uncle Art and Aunt Nellie and enjoyed ourselves so much, and they made a big impression on my life all the way through, to be proud to be a Langman.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Judith. Is there anybody else that would like to ask anything?
Braeden, it's great to hear our family history put together like that. And I lived around the corner from the original farm. I'm a Gordon Langman's daughter, and was just a great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I've had a lot of fun doing the research for this, because there's just so much to find and learn.
And then there was somebody else in the chat. Somebody said, "Hi, Braeden. Thanks for the interesting presentation. I'm another Langman descendant, although from Richard Langman, another one of Nicholas's sons. Would love to know any further family details if you have about the Langman family history. Sue Merritt." And then I have Sue's email that I can forward on to. I'll forward that on to Braeden.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Am I on?
I can send some book titles that I have that have a lot of information about our family.
I think I heard somebody else talking. Is there somebody else that had a question?
Somebody asked about Langman family history. There is a fairly detailed that refers to a lot of them. One of the authors was Ruth Langman, so that would be Art's daughter-in-law. Somewhere there's copies that lots and lots of us have that. If somebody's not familiar with that history, that's available.
Would that be this book that you're talking about? A Langman
Yes,
family
sir.
history?
Yes, sir. You got it. You got it. You got it. So anybody looking for information, there's one source.
Yeah.
And then with Langman Kendrick say wonderful presentation. Sorry, I'm just reading from the chat. Thank you. And then Mary Cottage, thanks. I'm also curious about where in Hawkstone, the brothers lived.
So the Bass Lake, the farm that they grew up on is on the southeast shore of Bass Lake. That's where they grew up. And then the one that Harry moved to when he was older is on Line 12 North, just south of the Rugby Hall, just a few farms south of there. Was that what you were asking?
I think that was from Sue. Sue, does that kind of clarify? I'm just pausing to see. Yes. Yeah. Yes, thank you.
One of the things to know about that, when you asked about the Langman brothers, these two are one of, in my head, I think it's 8 brothers. And they other ones farmed in the area too. So you start searching Langmans in the Rugby, Bass Lake area, there's no end. I see Braeden laughing. He's aware.
Oh, yes.
Well, it's always nice to discover these families in Simcoe County that have such a rich history in Simcoe County. And then also just to hear about their involvement in different aspects, including the war. So it's awesome. I think there's a Linda that we keep having problems, maybe. I don't know. They have a question, but they're having problems coming in. Let's see. Linda, are you able to be on now? Or I know that sometimes you come off and go back on.
May I say one more thing? Thank you to Braeden. I'm the oldest grandson of William, another brother.
Oh.
And I'm I'm a long way off, and I'm in a cornfield, and I gotta go to my machine. Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure. Thanks for attending.
Yes, thank you very much. Okay, I think I don't. Oh, then we have Chris. Sorry, just gonna go to the chat. Chris said, "Thanks for sharing your research with us, Braeden. It's great to learn more about our family history. It's nice to see that there's so many people on here that are able to learn about the Langman family. That's awesome."
Yes. You're welcome, Chris. Thanks for attending.
Okay, I think everybody has asked their questions. There doesn't seem to be anybody else. So Braeden, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. It was great to learn about the Langman brothers and their history involving in Simcoe County. And as I said, also in the war. It's lovely. It's always great to learn new stories from Simcoe County. Yeah. And I just wanted to invite everybody else. We have 3 other lectures this month. Our next one being November 14th. And it's Michael Petru, and he'll be talking about In Our Voices. He works at the Canadian War Museum, and he's also has a lot of different other experiences when it comes to war. So it'll be a really great one to tune to. Elizabeth Langman said, "Is there a recording available after that we can share with others?" I was having difficulties with my laptop, so there is a recording, but it's not the whole presentation because for some reason I couldn't get it to actually log on. But I'll see what I can get from that, and I'll share maybe with Braeden. Braeden, do you have Elizabeth's contact?
No, I don't have that.
Okay. So I am going to share my email. And anybody that has any inquiries, you can feel free to email me, and then I'll see what I can do. Perfect. I see that Elizabeth has sent hers, so I have. Okay, that's awesome. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. For anybody else, I do have my email there, so you can feel free to send any questions my way. But other than that, I'd like to thank you all for joining me. It's a great start to our Remembrance Month virtual series. So I really appreciate everybody joining us, and I hope you all have a fabulous night. Okay. Thank you very much, Braeden.
Thank you, Meredith.